Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, welcome everybody. As you know, or may not know, I taught public education for 33 years. I taught classes, college prep biology, a class, I was asked to put together a environmental class, and they wanted it one semester long, and I told them no. And they looked at me like, how can you tell us no? And I said, well, I just did, and I knew at that time that if I taught a one semester class, it would turn into a dumping ground of kids that were a little bit more challenging than, shall we say, the normal traditional high school kid. So I came up with a class called field biology. I told them that this was an experiential class, meaning hands-on, and we would go out in the field to learn about the environment and such. And they went with it. I went on a Yosemite field trip for 27 years, where I took students from Upland High School to Yosemite around March 20th. We started out with a 5-day program with the Yosemite Institute, and then it developed into a 7-day program where we added 2 days of and 3 nights of cross-country ski trip, or 3 days and 2 nights of a cross-country ski trip from Badger Pass to Glacier Point. I've taken kids to Catalina Island, canoed down the Colorado River, and 4 years we did week-long backpacking trips in the Sierras. And so, with high school kids, I have got a lot of experience on the organizational structure and what needs to be done as far as what a school board would kind of require. And I know that Redlands Camera Club is not a school board. And so I'm just going to share what I had to go through with my field trips at a pretty tight level for meeting the requirements of the school board, and some things that, are still the same, whether it be a field trip with high school kids or a field trip with Redlands Camera Club, but it's still something for you guys to be thinking about as to how you want to organize, or anybody organize, a field trip. So with that, the first thing is safety. Safety cannot be, shall we say, on the back burner. You have to have safety as your first and foremost component, whether you're going on a Redlands Camera trip or a high school trip. And so from this point on, I'm going to be talking about for Redlands Camera Club. Okay. Field trips can have multiple outcomes. They lend themselves to socialization, mentoring, and exploring great places and new places. Okay. So, when we go on a field trip, we may have people, for example, when we go to Joshua Tree, that have maybe never been to Joshua Tree, or maybe never been to this area, or maybe never been to this area at this time of the year, whatever that time would be. So, we have possibility of new locations and return for a field trip for more in-depth kind of like getting into it. Okay. Here are some items that we need to consider for organizing a field trip. Is this a trip where participants are going to photograph something specifically? Meaning, are we all going to herd to, for example, when we go to the San Diego Zoo, are we all going to go to the giraffes? And we're all going to stay there for X amount of minutes and photograph giraffes. And then we're going to go to the hippos, or then we're going to go, etc. You got the idea. If people will be wandering around, for example, in Joshua Tree, okay, might it be wise, for safety's sake, that we have people 2 in a row? A partner. Joshua Tree is one of those places where Jim will attest to that you can get lost pretty easily. You can get turned around because you're focusing on whatever you're photographing, and you're kind of ambling around, and all of a sudden you look and go, wait a minute, where am I? So, it's something to consider. Another category would be multiple leaders. So let's say you have 2 or 3 leaders. Do we split our group up into smaller groups where we follow along with the leader and such. Now, for me, with photography, I would prefer just being left alone. So I can focus and look and do what interests me. But for a person who's organizing the trip and not knowing exactly who your participants are completely, meaning we might have some new members from the organization that are attending for the very first time and are excited, and they may not have some of the photographic skills that other people have. So maybe having a mentor or somebody to shadow so that they can ask questions would be a good thing to do, as well as keeping it somewhat relatively safe. Get to know their people. To build a bond with your group, it's probably pretty wise to know the people. I've attended a photographic, shall we say, workshop, and we all met at this one room, and the person who was leading the organization, the workshop, pretty much said, "Well, welcome. My name is so and so," and just kind of jumped right into it. There was no introduction of the people who were in the group. No one saying, "Hey, I'm from wherever. I shoot Canon or Nikon or whatever, Olympus." There was just nothing. There was no combination of bonding with the people and getting to know the people in your group. Okay, there's nothing wrong with having people in a circle. And for the leader, if you don't know everybody, you just kind of have a sheet of paper and you write the names down in the circle and try to remember who they are, so that you go up to the person and say, "Steve." "No, it's Jim." "Oh, I'm sorry." It's kind of like, you really want to know the names of your participants. Okay. Name tags help. But there's a lot of people that just don't want to walk around with a name tag, so that when they go to lunch, someplace else, they kind of go, "Oh, they're advertising who they are." So it's kind of one of those things where, some people like them and prefer them and other people don't. Pre-field trip planning. It is imperative that you probably ought to do the field trip yourself, so that for example, your timeline. I got there at 7:00. The sun was just crusting over the horizon, whatever. I went over to such and such place. Oh, I found out that if I wanted to go to this area, it does require a little bit of rock scrambling, or there is a good bunch of prickly pear cactus or cholla, like it's a cholla gardens in Joshua Tree. And you kind of want to have this pre-planned in your head, so that when you actually do the field trip, you're not kind of stumbling along figuring it out yourself as you go. So you kind of need to have a plan. Will the field trip be on a weekday or a weekend? For me, being retired, weekdays were great, but there are still people who work. So they're kind of going, "Well, I'd like to go, but I can't go because," and then you have the people who were retired who really don't want to go on a weekend because guess what? Everybody and their grandmother's there. And, it's crowded and parking is challenged and all the other logistics that kind of go with it. So those are a couple of things that we have planned. Now, with that being said, as I shared with you, I took students to Yosemite for 27 years. And we would drive up and we would stop at Fresno at the Costco gas station, and everybody would get gas, whether they used my card or their own card and such. We got a good deal on gasoline, but everybody in the carpooling was together. Okay. Well, of course, all the kids, they wanted to go right across the way to the local fast food place. Okay, so that takes up a little bit more time, but they were all together. And, that was part of the plan, even though it was not necessarily said, but it was just still part of the plan. Another part of the plan is, after our 5 or 7 day trip, we drove home and all the kids in all the vehicles are dead asleep. I mean, they're just crashed. They've gone 5 to 7 days, burning the candles at both ends and just doing activity and physical activity and hiking and stuff that they're not normally used to. Well, we drive down into Bakersfield and we would stop at the Panama exit for the In-N-Out hamburger. And for the first time, I've seen my students eat 2, sometimes 3, 4x4 In-N-Out hamburgers. So that's like part of the plan, okay? Here's a list of things that I had to consider when I was doing my field trips. So I had a carpooling, sometimes 3 or 4 other vehicles. These parents had to be turn in their DMV background check to the school district because we wanted to make sure that there was no one that had a DUI or didn't have a driver's license or at least had automobile insurance. So that was good. Then we also had cell phones. Everybody had my cell phone and I had their cell phones. And we would be driving along and son of a gun, traffic would hit and we'd have to kind of slow down the people in front so that that person who got separated would be able to catch up. Everybody had a map. Everybody had an itinerary. Everybody knew exactly where we were going, okay? What is the size of your group? Better to keep it small. For a wilderness permit, when I did my 4 years of backpacking trips, wilderness permit was for 15. Okay, so I'm 15, we can have 14 other students. But I always had a female and possibly another male chaperone. So, the number of students was smaller. And we were able to keep track and make sure that everybody was doing okay. And they had partners, buddies, so that, if somebody was starting to hurt, we would kind of know that. There'll always be someone who will not be able to walk as fast and keep up with the majority. And for my backpacking trips, that's always the case. So I had to, when I did my first trip, I did it the year before myself, and I was in great shape and I was able to hike, but then I had to add a lot more time to the trip because I had to anticipate that there would be a student or two that was not going to be able to keep up. And sure enough, the very first year and the 3 years afterwards, there was always those 1 or 2 students. Now, you can tell your students all you want. You got to be in shape, months in advance. We always went in March, but here I'm talking about it in October, and you got to get in shape. You got to do this, and everybody had no problem. Mr. Ficke, we're good. And not always the case. For Redlands Camera Club, we have pretty good age range. And maybe not everybody can walk as fast, or maybe somebody can't go up a little bouldering and be with the person. And, you got to have that kind of consideration. You do not ever, under any circumstances, leave someone behind, because that's when things happen, and oftentimes not for the good. Joshua Tree, as you all know, there are no cell towers. So you got to plan as to how you're going to communicate and where you're going to be and such. Weather. You always got to include an appropriate clothing list for your participants. Now, for Bruce's trip to Anza-Borrego, hot.
Yeah.
And maybe even a little hotter than hot, because after this cold spell that we're having right now, it's supposed to be warming up starting, I don't know, Saturday. At least that's what the weather is. Okay. I don't know that we have to worry about snow or wind or sunscreen at night, but people need to be bringing lots of water, period. And that is something that I hope Bruce is considering when he tells everybody, what are the things that you need to be bringing? Water, water, and more water. Okay, I understand that if you drink a lot of water, you got to go to the facilities, but it's better than having heat stroke or heat exhaustion and then having to worry about that throughout the trip. Okay. Transportation can include carpooling, but ascertain that driver has an appropriate insurance. You know, just because you like the person, just because you think the person is a great person, doesn't mean that they don't have a DUI. Doesn't mean that they don't have insurance. And if there's an accident, a blown tire, where the car gets into a little fender bender, you know, and you might get hurt, who's going to take care of that? Okay. And you know, I when I said that my drivers for our trips had to bring to the district office their DMV certification and proof that they had liability insurance for driving. And oh, by the way, they had to make sure that their headlights worked, that the tires were adequate, and that they had safety belts. Okay. For Redlands Camera Club, you may be going with a friend that you've gone with before and before and before. But you know, back in your mind, now that I'm sharing this, is something that you might want to be thinking about down the road. Okay. What protocols do you have in place if a car breaks down, a flat tire? Meaning, does the person who gets the flat tire have a cell phone that they can call the leader and tell them that, guess what, I got a flat tire, I'm at such and such place, and you know, I'll be there hopefully in an hour. Okay. It's something to think about. Is there any cost to the field trip? Entrance fees, for example, when you go into Joshua Tree, or Yosemite National Park, or Anza Borrego. What about lunch? And how much is this going to cost? Everybody who went to San Diego Zoo, you know, they knew that there was a fee, but are we helping out the drivers for gasoline? Even though gasoline is now around $5 a gallon, it wasn't too long ago that it was a little higher than that. So, you know, even though we're carpooling, is there some kind of, you know, helping out the driver with the wear and tear in the car and the gasoline? Parking. You know, once again, during the week, parking is usually not an issue. But, you know, when I went to Yosemite, oftentimes we started on a Friday and we went to the cross-country skiing on Saturday, Sunday, and came back on Monday. And we had to park our vehicles where there were a lot of other cars. So, you know, parking, is that going to be an issue on the weekends? Okay. And is there adequate parking? Meaning, are you not going to be able to double park and wind up coming back and finding yourself got a ticket? That kind of not happy. If you're doing sunrise photography, will headlamps be required? Will walking to the destination be required? Or for example, if you're going to, let's say the Grand Canyon, you just kind of park it right there and walk, what, the 20 or 30 feet to the railing and you set up, okay? Do you know where you're going to set up? So if it's sunrise photography, it's going to be dark. But if it's sunset photography, you might get there a little earlier and you'll be able to know, okay, the sun is over here and I want to kind of pull my camera in this direction to get whatever I want to shoot, okay? Let me see here. Walking hazards. Been on a couple of field trips to Joshua Tree where, you know, the Cholla Gardens, and inevitably somebody gets a little bit too close to the Cholla. And whether it be a tennis shoe or whatever, and do we have needle nose pliers to pull out the needles of the Cholla, or, you know, do we have unsafe walking conditions? Luckily for me, out of my 27 years of taking students to Yosemite, I had one student who was talking and chewing gum at the same time, and they tripped on a little boulder and they put their hands out and they got scraped up on the hands and such, and the knee. For the most part, that is the worst thing that happened with me on my 27 years taking students to Yosemite. My 4 years of backpacking trips, knock on wood, I did not have a single incident that required any kind of first aid or such. So maybe I was lucky, but then again, maybe I was a little bit anal in making sure that everything was going the way I wanted to. Okay. When I went to Yosemite with my students, I had a wilderness first aid card. It's not the same thing as a wilderness first responder. A wilderness first responder is 80 hours of training plus a practicum. Wilderness first aid, it's a 2-day class, and you can do a little bit more than just, call 911, especially if you're on a trail that's 2 or 3 miles out, and you can do a little bit more first aid. Regardless, if you're in Joshua Tree or out in the desert and somebody gets bit by a rattlesnake, the best treatment is to get them out as quick as possible. Do not do any first aid stuff on the person, and just get them out. And when you can get to the parking lot, you call 911 and make your way there. Okay. Restroom facilities. Men usually don't have an issue with this, but women, they do. And we want to be sure that, when you go on a trip, that, oh, by the way, restroom facilities are over here. And we're going to be doing our activity this morning from, let's say, 7 o'clock till 9:30. And then we're going to go to this spot where there will be restrooms. So restroom facilities are pretty important for everybody. Okay. Lunch, where and what conditions? Is there going to be water available? Is there going to be, I don't know, sodas, margaritas? I don't know. But do people need to bring an ice chest with their own margarita mix and margarita stuff? Okay. So it's something to think about when you were doing lunches. I've been on a couple of, shall we say, photo workshops. And it was like, well, we're going to try to be over here at this time, but if we don't make it, and it's goosey-loosey, and that just doesn't really work for people who really need to have and feel that the person who's running it is under control. You understand what I'm saying? There's that expectation that if you are on a field trip and somebody's leading it, that you want to feel that that person really knows what they're doing. Okay. Next one. How can you develop an itinerary with a map and get the word out? Advertising, etc. So Bruce is already talking about the Anza Borrego. He wants a RSVP so that he knows who's going. He's already said that we're going to meet at such and such place, and that we're going to go from there to Anza Borrego. And he has already said that they're going to be photographing the Scorpion, the Jeep, and something else. Okay. Now, with Redlands Camera Club, who are all adults, it's pretty open to where, let's say it's like 1 o'clock in the morning and somebody goes, I'm kind of done with this. I want to go home. Okay, bye, drive safely. But does that person connect with Bruce and let Bruce know that they're leaving? Just a question. Your responsibility as a leader. Another consideration is what you might expect of you as a leader. Is your job to facilitate a gathering of photo opportunities, or will you be more doing of a workshop leader, where that means you'll be doing some instruction, that you're not going to be like running off on your own and doing the photography? And are you going to have help doing that? Okay, so if you are just the leader and you're saying we're going to go here, Do you organize in your mind that if we're going to go in pairs or we're going to go in small groups? And if we're going to do more of a workshop, what is your role? And do you have other people to help you do that when two or three people who may not have enough experience say, hey, Bruce, what's an f-stop? I don't know. So overview. What is your objective of the trip? Is this an opportunity for exploration? We doing sunrise, sunset photography or bird photography? I remember a couple years ago, Wayne and I went out to this secret place, and we got there early. We set up our chairs and we were photographing burrowing owls. And, it was pretty fun. We were just sitting there chit-chatting and such, watching the burrowing owls do their thing, mostly sit there and just sit there. And I think just sit there until about 5 minutes before I was done. I said, Wayne, shoot, it's almost, I forget what time it was, 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. And I says, I'm about ready to go. And the burrowing owl took off and flew. So that was pretty cool. But again, what is your objective? Okay, if you're doing a field trip. Okay, for Wayne and I, it was just hanging out, having fun, two guys setting up, shooting burrowing owls and such. But what if you had a group of people? Okay, first of all, I would not be taking them to the spot where the burrowing owls are. Okay, I would be taking them someplace else. Maybe not shooting burrowing owls, but maybe going to the San Jacinto wildlife area. Okay, so we could carpool, and people could kind of go in the big, huge circles, and maybe do early morning, or I preferred late afternoon, and then we meet up. Maybe we go out to the local farmer boys on the way home, and there you go. So that's some thoughts there. Actual trip time frame. List of who are driving and who are in which vehicles. Head count. As a high school teacher, I like to have fun. And one year we had this one young lady who was, shall we say, how can I tactfully say it politely, since she's not listening, kind of a space cadet. And we stopped to get gas, and everybody went to the restroom and then went to the fast food place. And, word got out real quickly that we were going to pull the vehicles just, 100 feet over to the right. And something, her and her girlfriend came out and they didn't see the vehicles. And unfortunately, everybody was laughing, but we all had a good time. Okay. But it has happened, not on my field trips, that all of a sudden we go, hey, wait a minute. Has anybody seen Wayne? Oh, crap. Could he be back where we were last at? So it is important to do a head count. Yeah, you don't want to leave somebody behind. Okay. Head count every time you move from one place to another. Yes, it has happened. And this photograph here is one of my Sierra backpacking trips with the high school students. And, that's my gear there in the foreground, but I had tents for everybody. I had 5 tents from Sierra Design that were donated to Upland High School for free. And these are 3-season tents. And I mathematically calculated that I needed 3 3-person tent and 2 2-person tent to make the numbers work, depending on the number of boys and girls, so that there was no commingling. Okay. Itinerary. Here's an example of an itinerary for a day trip. We meet at 6:30, meet at, and as Bruce already pointed out, he already has shared with us where they're going to meet at. We will leave at what time? For where? As indicated on the map. So, if somebody was to come late, because they had a flat tire, at least they would call Bruce and let him know. And then they would still know where to go, even though 6:30 has passed. Not ideal, but we're talking about adults, okay? We arrive at where? At 8 a.m. and we shoot till 10:30, and then we leave for wherever for lunch, presuming this is a day trip. We arrive at 11 o'clock and we stay till 12:30, an hour and a half, plenty of time for people to share, talk, eat, go to the restroom, put in new battery, etc., etc. We leave for and arrive at 1:30, shoot till 3, and then leave for our hotel, if it's an overnighter, and check in, or other arrangements that have been made. Depending on when sunset is, and that's another crucial point. Yes, you can, there's plenty of apps out right now that you can, go to, like Photo Pills. You can go to that spot and you can find out what time sunset would be, okay? But it's still important for you to know ahead of time when sunset's going to be, so that you can corral everybody, get them in the cars, and go to that spot for the sunset opportunity. Then, at such and such time, we meet for dinner or we drive home. That makes sense. Now, as you can see, wow, this is going to take a little bit of planning for somebody. And, for Redlands Camera Club, we'll get into some of the aspects as to why we might want to be doing something like this later. Multi-day trips. Logistics and following an itinerary are critical as it demonstrates your organizational abilities, okay? Much of the time, a person could feel like a sheep herder all day long, just, moving from point A to point B to point C, lunch, bathroom break, blah, 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 okay? So we want everybody to feel relaxed. We want everybody to feel comfortable. And so it's all about the detail and how they perceive you as to that, whether they want to go on another field trip with you or not, okay? Having empathy with your group, for somebody that maybe not have the ability to walk as fast, okay? Or somebody who still learning what an f-stop is, et cetera, to provide that time within your schedule so that you can actually meet the needs of most of your people. Finally, but not yet finished, the above information is meant to be a guideline for leading a field trip. It's not the definite guide. On another note, if you are a person attending a field trip, you probably should have some expectations about such trips that you may want to consider. For example, let's say you, the last time we had a meeting, Ralph Nordstrom spoke to us. And I've spoken to Ralph a number of times over the years. So I called him up a couple of days after our session. And I said, Ralph, I got a couple of questions for you as to how you put on one of your workshops. We'll get to that in a second. Things you might consider for a field trip. If you are not the leader, who's driving? Who am I going to be with? Again, going back to, do they have insurance? Well, how do you know they have insurance? Are you being presumptuous by asking, Wayne, do you have automobile insurance? Okay. Did you look at the tires of the vehicle that you're getting into? Stuff like that. Okay. Will your equipment be safe, or will it just be thrown back in the back of the vehicle like everybody else's? Some people like, throw the camera bag in there. I'm not worried about it. Other people, it took me 5 years to save up all that money for my little point and shoot camera. So I can't replace it. I want to be a little bit more careful about it. Okay. Are you overpacking or taking what you need? If we're going to be doing bird photography, do you really need your macro lens? No? Does your gear match what the trip is designed for landscape, wildlife, macro? Okay. Yes, it's important to take, an extra camera body, for example. But if we're doing bird photography, we don't need a 50mm lens more than likely. Okay. Day trips. Is the itinerary detailed enough for you? And is the transportation adequate? Remember, safety, safety, safety. Is the persons leading the trip have any first aid background, or are they certification current? Well, yeah. I don't. My wilderness first aid certificate has expired. Let me think. I've been retired 11 years now, so I can't do any of the stuff that I could do when my certificate was current. All I can do is basic first aid and call 911. So something to be thinking about. Communication. Were cell phone numbers passed out? Do the leaders have walkie-talkies so that people can communicate from car to car? Expectations on food and water as well as bathroom breaks. You know your own physical, medical concerns. Are these concerns being part of the consideration of the trip that you are participating in? If not, then you have to ask, will they be? For example, let's say it's an overnight trip, or no, just a day trip, and they're providing food, and you are type 2 diabetic. Do you need to bring your own food, or are they going to be able to provide something for you that will be something that you can eat? Good example. Okay. Contracted trips. Many of us have taken some contracted trips to where, we signed on the dotted line, paid the money, and just took off and flew or drove wherever and such. Determine what the cost of the trip is, what is included and what is not, and what is expected from you. You want to be sure that you are, when you look at the website or something, that you are studying it and you have a piece of paper and you're writing down more questions so that you can actually ask the person who's leading this thing, or and find out more specifically. Transportation, luggage, camera equipment. If you're flying, okay, is your equipment going to be thrown in the back of the cargo part of the trip, or will you have a carry-on so that you can put it in the overhead compartment? Okay. Is there proof of liability insurance from the organization that's putting on the contracted trip? It's easy for them to say, oh yeah, I have liability insurance. Not. But until something happens, they don't need to really pony up and show you that they had liability insurance. Okay. National parks, state parks, etc. Are they an approved contracted provider? For example, Yosemite Institute was a contracted provider for Yosemite National Park. They had to do all this paperwork and such to be able to provide field trips in Yosemite. Same thing with Joshua Tree. Ralph Nordstrom, he had to get permission and fill out a whole bunch of paperwork to be able to provide a field trip in Joshua Tree National Park. Redlands Camera Club. Technically, you're supposed to provide paperwork and get approved from Joshua Tree National Park if we are going to provide a field trip to Joshua Tree. Have we ever done that? Probably not. But that's just the way the national parks are, okay? And the state parks. Private rooms. Will it cost more or a shared room? Okay. Depending on, here you are, a group of people just meeting together for the first time, and you're going to be sharing with this person here. You don't know that person is not an axe murderer. Probably not. but you don't know. Meals, dietary concerns, diabetic, okay? Luggage, how much and for what conditions? If you were going to Yellowstone in the wintertime, you're probably going to need a little bit more clothing than you would in the summertime, okay? Just makes sense, okay? Clothing, time of year for winter, better to bring that down parka and a vest and gloves, okay? And we're not talking about bicycle gloves, okay? Legal considerations. When I talked to Ralph a couple weeks ago, I asked him, what does he do when he provides a workshop and people attend and sign up and pay their money? First of all, as I've shared with you, I've done field trips for 27 years to Yosemite and a whole bunch of others. Many of my parents have been attorneys, and 100% of them have told me that a release of liability form is 100% worthless. That anybody in the state of California, and far as that matters, probably anybody in the United States, can sue anybody for any reason at any time. So your release of liability is legally not binding, okay? So knowing that, Ralph, what do you do? Depending on where you're going. National parks, state parks all have different requirements. What he does is he provides an assumption of risk. The wording may begin as follows. Although the leader has taken reasonable steps to provide me with appropriate equipment and skills, guides, so that I can enjoy an activity for which I may not be skilled, leader has informed me that this activity is not without risk, on and on and on and on and on and on. Ralph did share that 90% of the people don't even read it, they just sign it, and he's good. He also provides some paperwork as to some of the, quote, hazards of where he goes. Different hazards, whether it be Joshua Tree, or different hazards if he's doing a coastal trip, where there are cliffs where people can fall thousands and thousands of miles to their death at the bottom of the ocean. So, it's all part of what Ralph does. And we had a good time chatting. I told him that I'm going to miss him when he goes to Colorado, but he's looking forward to going up there. He has this piece of property right next to a wild area, and he's pretty excited and looking forward to it. Safety notice. You'll probably need to let people know what about there might be expected, whether it's walking, bouldering, cliffs, heat stroke, heat exhaustion, rattlesnakes, or water, plants. There are certain plants that are just very prickly or very caustic, had acid in them, and they will, like stinging nettles, that you want to be sure that you point out to your participants, this is stinging nettles, this is poison oak, you need to be careful, and such. Okay, same thing with ticks and mosquitoes and whatever else. Concluding thoughts. As I've shared with you, I've done years and years of trips with high school students and had to fill out paperwork every single year for my Yosemite field trip, paperwork for all my other field trips that were day trips, whether it be to Catalina Island for the weekend or 3 days canoeing down the Colorado River, or for our week-long backpacking trip in the Sierras. The school board, I did not start out with the backpacking trip. I had to kind of muster up and show them that I could take these students on a field trip and everything was safe and they all came back alive. And I had to build up that trust before I was able to do the 4 years of week-long backpacking trips. But for Redlands Camera Club, I don't know where you guys want to go with this. I don't know. This is certainly something for the board to think about. But at the same time, if you are a person who, you have this favorite place that you'd like to go, and you'd like to share it with Redlands Camera Club, and you'd like to be doing a field trip, and since you've already been there, you already know pretty much the itinerary, you could easily plan a field trip by following some of these templates and putting it together and having a very successful time. There you go. 8 o'clock. Is anybody still there?
That's awesome, Dave. I appreciate you pulling all that together. It's interesting as I'm going through, for Borrego, like, oh crap, I better write better have a map. Oh, that's a good idea. Make sure I pass out my cell phone. Oh yeah, what about restrooms? Headlamps. I better tell everybody to bring, flashlights. So even just as something as, that I am assuming, because I've done it so many times, I've got to make sure that I tell other people as well.
Correct. I can't emphasize on being more prepared than not. It makes you feel more comfortable that everybody is kind of with the game plan than they're not. That's all. And
I was pleased to hear you said go out and do some scouting ahead of time. That's exactly what I did on Saturday. I did a test run, brought some friends with me so I could concentrate on making sure I could duplicate exactly what I needed to do so I could focus on the people who are going to be there and not experimenting on them.
There you go.
Question, Dave. If you were leading a group of people, say in the mountains, and it was overcast, and all of a sudden lightning was getting fairly close to your group.
In a heartbeat. Get in your cars and hunker down. Whether we stay there, there are apps on your phone, and depending on whether you get cell service or not, that you can see where the weather pattern is. I know I've looked at it for here up in Lake Arrowhead, when we had our big thunderstorms and such, and I could actually see that cell moving right across Lake Arrowhead, knowing that within about, I don't know, half an hour, that it would probably close to stop raining and such. But yeah, if there was lightning, now, if you are several miles away from your vehicle, or you're not going to be able to get back there in time, you hunker down. And then that means you lay your day pack on the ground and you crawl on top of it and you stay there. And you don't be necessarily amongst a bunch of trees. So yeah, but if you are close to being able to get to your vehicles, you evacuate immediately. Same thing if it starts raining real hard. If you think it's just going to sprinkle a little bit, hey, no big deal. But once again, you may be able to walk faster than the slowest person in your group, and you are responsible for that slowest person. So, you'd better be, I don't know, a little bit more safe than sorry. Prudence goes a long ways. And, the thunder showers that we had last week or so, it started out with a little sprinkle and it just came down hard. And I can't stress. I mean, one time we were in Yosemite for one of my Yosemite field trips in March. And I was told that one of the days that we were there, the sun came out. And like I said, we always got there around March 20th. And I said, yeah, okay. So he says, no, you don't get it. This is the first day that the sun has come out and it hasn't snowed in 20 days. And there are times when it has snowed where it wasn't snow, it wasn't rain, but what I call splotches, about silver dollar size splotches that are falling out of the trees and onto you, and your raincoat, if it isn't adequate, you are going to get wet. So, and you're out there all day long. So things to consider.
So you said, look at your cell phone app, weather app, and look for cells moving. What app are you recommending?
I've got NOAA app as well as my app on my phone for what's it called? The weather.
Thank you.
Yeah. The weather app that comes on my iPhone, and a NOAA, National Oceanic, NOAA weather app.
Dave, I want to emphasize something that happened to me. You need to keep a close eye on people who show up for a day trip at the last minute. It's easy to lose track of those people, and you got to be sure to get their cell phone number and make sure they have yours. I had an experience where we lost somebody, and it took a long time for me to finally call enough people to find out what his cell phone number was. So that's kind of important to keep track of the latecomers.
Yeah, and another thing that we need to be thinking about is that we've talked about this a couple of years ago, for our workshops, our field trips and such. Do we allow non-members to go, or do we just stick it to or open it up to anybody? And for example, Bruce, today is Monday. Bruce, do you have a cutoff by Wednesday? And if I don't hear from you by Wednesday, guess what? You're not expected to be going. And yet it's different because we're all adults as opposed to high school kids. And you're right, Carl. Somebody goes, well, yeah, I saw it in the newsletter. I'll just show up. Well, how's that fair to me, who's doing the program or the field trip, and everybody else, to where you just show up? So it's a tough call. Anybody else?
Yeah, it is a tough call. You want more people to go, so you want to open it up longer. But at the same time, for me to plan, I need to have some sense of count. I don't think I put a requested RSVP by date. That probably would have been a good idea.
And that's okay, Bruce. It's Angel Borrego, it's just only going to be hot. People probably need to bring some Gatorade, some electrolytes besides the water, because when I worked in construction in Palm Springs in the summertime, when I was, a few years younger, we'd get sick just drinking water. Okay. So having some like Gatorade with electrolytes in it does help a lot. Okay. On the other hand, you're right. I prefer smaller trips. That way I feel I have control. And when I did my Yosemite field trips for the week-long trips, the largest number that we had was about 45 kids. And I had a number of adults that helped supervise, because I could not handle 45 kids by myself, and the school board would not condone that anyway. So having other adults that were working with me but knew, and this is important, even though their son or daughter was on the field trip, they knew I was the one who made the final call, not them. And there's only one instance that we had an issue, and I took care of that right away, and we didn't have any more problems the rest of that week. But fortunately, 27 years, knock on wood, the worst I had is a scraped knee and palms of a hand, and that was it. So
You said you would prefer
up, Bruce.
vernacular.
Bruce can't hear you. Is everybody frozen?
Um, One,